My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm 49 years old, and I live alone in a small paid-off townhouse that I've spent my entire adult life protecting. I'm not the kind of person who makes careless decisions. I don't gamble, I don't chase get-rich-quick schemes, and I don't hand over control of my life to anyone unless I absolutely have to. Which is why what my brother did to me still feels impossible to believe, even now. I was standing at the grocery checkout on a Thursday afternoon, watching the cashier scan my items. When she swiped my card, the machine beeped. Declined. I frowned and handed her my backup card. Declined again. My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and saw 17 bank alerts lighting up my screen. Every single account showed the same thing, $0. My throat tightened as I stumbled outside and called my bank, barely able to breathe. The representative said one name calmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. My brother's name. And that's when I realized he didn't just steal my money. He planned this entire thing. I sat in my car in that parking lot for almost an hour, trying to piece together how this happened. My brother, Nathan, had always been the golden child in our family. Growing up, our parents treated him like he could do no wrong. Even when he made mistakes, they explained them away as learning experiences. I was the responsible one, the quiet one who kept her head down and saved every dollar. 6 months ago, I had surgery on my shoulder, nothing major, but it left me unable to drive or handle daily tasks for a few weeks. Nathan offered to help manage my bills and accounts while I recovered. It felt natural to trust him. Our parents had always said, family protects family. He'd helped me before, so why would this time be different? I signed the documents he brought over without reading them closely. He assured me it was just temporary access, just to keep things running smoothly. I believed him completely. Now, sitting in that grocery store parking lot with empty accounts, I realized how foolish that trust had been. The next morning, I went straight to my bank. A manager pulled up my account history and showed me the transfers. 4 clean movements over a single night. The amounts were strategic, just under the thresholds that would trigger automatic fraud alerts. The timestamps showed precision, not panic. He didn't drain my accounts in a desperate rush. He did it surgically, like he'd been planning it for weeks. Each transfer went to an external account I didn't recognize. When I asked if they could reverse the transactions, the manager's face turned grim. These were authorized by someone with full account access, she explained. That makes recovery complicated. My chest tightened. Then she added something that made my blood run cold. He also closed the accounts after the final transfer. That meant he wasn't just stealing my money. He was erasing the evidence, covering his tracks, making sure I couldn't even freeze what was left. My hands trembled as I signed the fraud report paperwork. Nathan hadn't just betrayed me. He'd destroyed me. I left the bank and drove straight to Nathan's apartment across town. My mind raced with 1,000 things I wanted to scream at him. But when I arrived, the parking spot where his car usually sat was empty. I knocked on his door anyway, pounding harder when no one answered. A neighbor poked her head out and said, he left early this morning. Had his truck loaded up with boxes. I asked if he mentioned where he was going. She shook her head. No forwarding address or anything. Just said he was moving on. I tried calling his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I sent texts. No response. I even checked his social media accounts. All of them deleted or deactivated. He'd vanished completely. Standing there in that empty hallway, I felt something worse than anger. I felt completely alone. My brother, the person I'd trusted more than anyone, had stolen everything from me and disappeared like I meant nothing. The reality of my situation hit me all at once. I wasn't just broke. I was abandoned. The next few days were humiliating in ways I never imagined. I had to borrow $40 from Brenda, a coworker who was half my age, just to buy groceries. She handed me the cash with a sympathetic smile, but I could see the pity in her eyes. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and cried for the first time since this nightmare started. I felt stupid. Used. More than anything, I was furious at myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have signed over access to everything without asking a single question? Nathan had counted on my trust, and I'd handed it to him without hesitation. I kept replaying every conversation we'd had in the weeks before he vanished. Were there signs? Did he seem nervous or guilty? I couldn't remember anything unusual. He'd been charming, helpful, concerned about my recovery. It was all an act. 2 days later, something arrived in my mailbox that changed everything. It was a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a tax document tied to a trust account I'd completely forgotten about. My late father had opened it years ago. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to remember when my father had set up this account. It must have been at least 15 years ago, back when he was worried about estate planning. He'd mentioned it once or twice, but after he passed away, I'd never followed up. The account had been sitting dormant, quietly accumulating a small amount of interest. The balance wasn't life-changing, just under $8,000, but it was something. More importantly, Nathan had no idea it existed. He'd been so thorough in draining everything else, but he'd missed this one account because it wasn't linked to my main bank. For the first time since this started, I felt a flicker of hope. This money would give me time. Time to think, time to plan, time to figure out how to fight back. I immediately transferred the funds to a new account at a different bank, one Nathan would never be able to access. Then I sat down and started writing everything I could remember. Dates, amounts, conversations, documents I'd signed. If I was going to fix this, I needed to be smart about it. The following Monday, I met with a legal aid attorney named Ms. Priya Sharma. Her office was small but organized, with files stacked neatly on every surface. I told her everything. The surgery, the signed documents, the vanished money, Nathan's disappearance. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked up and said something that steadied my racing thoughts. "You didn't lose yet." I blinked at her, confused. She explained that cases like mine happen more often than people realized, especially within families. The key was documentation and patience. "The worst thing you can do right now is panic," she said. "If you chase him publicly, he'll dig in deeper. But if you let him think you're broken and helpless, he'll make mistakes." She asked if I was willing to let Nathan believe I'd given up. The idea felt strange, almost wrong, but I trusted her expertise. I nodded slowly. "Good," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Then here's what we're going to do." She outlined a strategy that was calm, methodical, and completely the opposite of what I wanted to do, which was scream at everyone. But I agreed. If staying quiet meant getting my life back, I'd do it. Over the next 48 hours, I followed Ms. Sharma's instructions exactly. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, so Nathan couldn't open any new accounts in my name. I documented every transaction, every email, every text message he'd ever sent me. I printed bank statements and made copies of the documents I'd signed. I didn't call Nathan. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't tell my relatives what had happened. To the outside world, I appeared to be quietly dealing with a personal issue. But inside, I was building a case. Ms. Sharma had explained that banks and courts moved slowly, but they moved thoroughly. If we wanted justice, we needed patience and evidence. So I waited. I went to work, paid my bills with the trust account money, and acted like everything was normal. It was exhausting pretending I wasn't falling apart. But I kept reminding myself that silence was my weapon now. Then, 2 days after my meeting with Ms. Sharma, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw Nathan's name. My heart pounded. This was it. I answered the call. Nathan's voice exploded through the speaker, panicked and breathless. "Kat, something's wrong. My accounts are locked. My cards won't work. I don't know what's happening." He sounded genuinely terrified, like the world was collapsing around him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the grocery store, the empty accounts, the vanished trust. I kept my voice calm and steady. "Slow down. What are you talking about?" He rambled about trying to withdraw cash that morning and being told his accounts were frozen. He'd called his bank, but they wouldn't give him details. "They said something about suspicious activity," he stammered. "But I didn't do anything wrong." I let the silence hang for a beat. Then I asked gently, "Where are you right now?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He knew he'd made a mistake calling me. But he was desperate, and desperate people make errors. I'm in Ohio, he finally admitted. Staying with a friend. Kat, you have to help me. I don't understand what's going on. I told him I'd look into it and hung up. Every single word he'd said was now documented, legally. I immediately called Ms. Sharma and replayed the conversation. She listened carefully, then explained what had likely happened. When Nathan moved large sums of money across state lines and closed accounts abruptly, it triggered red flags in the banking system. These flags didn't activate instantly. They appeared after the money settled and patterns were analyzed. Nathan's arrogance had made him sloppy. He thought he'd covered his tracks, but he'd actually painted a target on himself. The fraud department is probably investigating him right now, Ms. Sharma said. And if they find enough evidence, they'll escalate it to law enforcement. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that the system was working. Dread that my own brother might end up in serious legal trouble. But then I remembered his voice on that call. Panicked, selfish, only concerned about himself. He hadn't asked how I was doing. He hadn't apologized. He'd only called because he needed something from me. That realization hardened my resolve. Over the next few days, Nathan sent me a series of text messages. Long apologies. Excuses about stress and bad decisions. Claims that he'd only meant to borrow the money temporarily. Each text message Nathan sent was more desperate than the last. He wrote paragraphs about how he'd been going through a rough time, how he'd made a terrible mistake, how he never meant to hurt me. He blamed his financial stress, his failed business ideas, even our parents for always comparing him to other people. He said he'd planned to pay me back once he got on his feet. But he never once explained where the money actually went. He also started asking me not to involve lawyers. We can handle this as a family, he wrote. Please, Kat. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. I showed every message to Ms. Sharma. She smiled grimly and said, he's building our case for us. Each text was an admission. Proof that he knew what he'd done was wrong. Proof that he'd taken the money intentionally. Proof that he was trying to manipulate me into staying quiet. I didn't respond to any of them. My silence clearly unsettled him because the messages became more frantic. Why aren't you answering? Are you okay? Kat, please talk to me. I forwarded everything to my attorney and waited. Ms. Sharma explained that Nathan's panic was working in our favor. The more he tried to explain himself, the more he revealed. A week later, Ms. Sharma called with interesting news. While investigating Nathan's recent activity, she'd discovered something he probably hadn't thought about. He'd purchased a used pickup truck 2 days after draining my accounts. The truck was registered in his name, bought with cash, my cash. The title was easily traceable through the DMV, and the purchase date matched exactly with the timeline of the theft. This is significant, Ms. Sharma explained. It's a physical asset purchased with stolen funds. It gives us leverage. She filed a motion to place a lien on the truck, which meant Nathan couldn't sell it or transfer ownership without settling the debt he owed me. When I asked what this meant practically, she said, it means he's stuck. He can't run anymore without leaving a trail. That truck became a symbol of his arrogance. He thought he was being clever, converting my money into something he could use. Instead, he'd created evidence that couldn't be hidden or denied. I imagined his face when he found out about the lien. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something close to satisfaction. Nathan was finally realizing that actions had consequences. Then the phone calls from family members started. My cousin Brenda called first, her voice tight with disapproval. Kat, I heard you're suing Nathan. Is that really necessary? He's family. I asked how she'd heard about it. She said Nathan had been calling relatives, telling them I was overreacting to a misunderstanding. He said he was helping you manage your money and there was a mix-up with the transfers, Brenda explained. He's really upset that you won't talk to him. I felt my jaw clench. A mix-up. That's how he was spinning this. My uncle called next, saying I was going too far and that I'd ruin his life over money. My aunt sent a long email about forgiveness and family bonds. Each conversation made me angrier. Nathan had already rewritten the story, painting himself as the victim and me as the villain. None of them asked for my side. None of them questioned why Nathan had closed my accounts and disappeared if it was just a mix-up. They simply assumed I was being vindictive. I realized then that Nathan had always been good at this, manipulating people's perceptions, making himself look sympathetic. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Miss Sharma suggested a mediation call before moving forward with the civil lawsuit. It gives him one last chance to settle this quietly, she explained. And if he refuses, his words during mediation can be used in court. I agreed, though the idea of talking to Nathan again made my stomach turn. The call was scheduled for the following Thursday. Nathan, his lawyer, Ms. Sharma, and I joined a conference line facilitated by a neutral mediator. Nathan's voice was strained but calmer than before. He started by apologizing, not for stealing, but for how things looked. He claimed the money transfers were part of a plan to consolidate my finances and that he'd meant to explain everything before I noticed. He contradicted himself multiple times. First, he said he'd planned to pay me back within weeks. Then he admitted he'd used some of the money for urgent expenses. He confirmed the timeline of the transfers, the truck purchase, even his trip to Ohio. He didn't realize every word was being recorded and documented. When the mediator asked if he'd inform me before moving the money, Nathan hesitated. I didn't think I needed to. She'd signed the documents. That statement alone destroyed his defense. Miss Sharma made a note, and I saw her suppress a smile. Nathan's lawyer requested a recess halfway through the mediation. When we reconvened, his tone had changed. He knew the call hadn't gone well for Nathan. Miss Sharma laid out our terms clearly: full repayment of all stolen funds, damages for emotional distress, reimbursement of legal fees, and a formal admission of wrongdoing. Nathan's lawyer countered with a partial repayment offer, about 60% of what was taken, if I agreed to drop all legal action and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't even hesitate. No. Miss Sharma backed me up. My client isn't interested in hush money. She wants accountability. The mediator tried to find middle ground, but I wasn't budging. Nathan had stolen from me, lied to my family, and tried to manipulate me into silence. I wanted every dollar back, and I wanted it on record that he'd done this. The mediation ended without an agreement. Nathan's lawyer said they'd consider their options. Miss Sharma told me to prepare for a lawsuit. This is going to court, she said. I nodded. I was ready. If Nathan wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time, I had the truth on my side. We filed a civil lawsuit 2 weeks later. The complaint was straightforward: theft by deception, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of assets. Miss Sharma had built an airtight case with bank records, text messages, the truck title, and Nathan's own recorded admissions from the mediation call. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. During discovery, something unexpected emerged. Miss Sharma's investigation revealed that Nathan had done this before. 8 years earlier, he'd convinced our elderly aunt to sign over temporary control of her savings account, claiming he'd help her pay bills while she recovered from a fall. Just like with me, he drained the account and disappeared for weeks. Our aunt had quietly paid him off to avoid family drama, making him promise never to do it again. She'd never told anyone. When Miss Sharma showed me the records, I felt sick. This wasn't a one-time mistake. Nathan was a repeat offender who targeted family members when they were vulnerable. He'd learned that people would stay silent to avoid conflict. But I wasn't staying silent. The judge reviewed the discovery documents during a pretrial hearing. I watched his expression shift from neutral to disapproving as he read through Nathan's history. When Nathan's lawyer tried to argue that this was a family dispute, the judge cut him off. This is theft. Documented, repeated, and premeditated. The tone of the case shifted entirely in that moment. Nathan's lawyer requested a private meeting with Ms. Sharma. They wanted to settle. The offer came through in writing: full repayment of the stolen funds plus half of the legal fees. In exchange, Nathan asked me to agree not to press criminal charges and to keep the settlement terms confidential. Ms. Sharma handed me the document and waited for my response. I read it twice, feeling the weight of the decision. Part of me wanted this to be over. I was exhausted from months of stress and legal battles. But another part of me remembered standing in that grocery store parking lot, humiliated and terrified. I remembered borrowing money from coworkers. I remembered my family calling me vindictive without even asking what happened. No, I said quietly. Miss Sharma raised an eyebrow. You're sure? I nodded. I don't want a partial settlement. I want full restitution, full legal fees, and I want it on public record. He needs to face real consequences. Miss Sharma smiled slightly. All right. Then we go to trial. When Nathan received our rejection, he called me directly. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice shaking with anger. You're destroying me, Kat. I hope you're happy. I deleted it and moved on with my day. I wasn't destroying him. He'd destroyed himself. The trial lasted 2 days. Miss Sharma presented our case with precision. Bank records, transfer timestamps, text message admissions, the truck purchase, Nathan's history with our aunt. Nathan's lawyer tried to paint him as someone who'd made a mistake under financial pressure, but the evidence was overwhelming. Nathan took the stand and tried to explain his actions. He claimed he'd been in a dark place and hadn't been thinking clearly. He said he'd always planned to return the money. When Miss Sharma cross-examined him, she asked a simple question. If you plan to return the money, why did you close the accounts and disconnect your phone? Nathan stammered. He had no good answer. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear, guilty on all counts. The judge ordered full repayment of the stolen funds, every dollar. He added damages for emotional distress and court costs. He also approved wage garnishment, meaning Nathan's paychecks would be automatically docked until the debt was paid. If Nathan tried to avoid payment, the court authorized asset seizure, starting with the truck. Nathan's face went pale as the judge read the terms. He finally understood this wasn't going away. This judgment would follow him for years, affecting his credit, his employment, his ability to move on. I felt no joy in that moment, but I felt something close to peace. That evening, Nathan called me again. This time I answered. His voice was thick with tears. You destroyed me, Kat. I've lost everything. Are you happy now? I let him finish, then I spoke calmly. I didn't destroy you, Nathan. You did this to yourself. He tried to argue, but I cut him off. You stole from me when I was vulnerable. You lied to our entire family. You've done this to other people. This isn't about revenge. This is about accountability. He sobbed on the other end of the line. I can't believe you'd do this to your own brother. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. You stopped being my brother the moment you decided I was worth less than money. I hung up. He didn't call back. Over the following months, Nathan made his payments. Some came from wage garnishment. Others came after the court seized and sold his truck. He moved back to our hometown and took a job at a warehouse. Relatives whispered about the situation, but no one called to yell at me anymore. The truth had spread, and people finally understood what he'd done. I focused on rebuilding. I saved carefully, paid off old bills, and regained the stability Nathan had stolen from me. 6 months after the trial, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The return address was Nathan's. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page, written in his messy handwriting. He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for anything. He simply said he was sorry, truly sorry, for what he'd done. He admitted that he'd been selfish, reckless, and cruel. He said he understood why I couldn't forgive him and that he didn't expect me to. The letter ended with a single sentence. I hope you find peace. I read it twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I would, but not now. The wound was still too fresh. Some family members reached out to apologize for doubting me. My cousin Brenda admitted she should have asked for my side of the story instead of assuming Nathan was the victim. My uncle called to say he was ashamed of how he'd reacted. Their apologies helped, but they also reminded me how easily people believed lies when they came from someone charming. I forgave them, but I didn't forget. Trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild, if it ever does. A year after everything started, I was finally stable again. My accounts were healthy. My credit was clean. I'd even started saving for a small vacation, something I hadn't done in years. I downsized some expenses, learned to budget more carefully, and discovered I didn't need as much as I thought to feel secure. The entire experience had changed me. I was more cautious now, more aware of red flags, more willing to ask questions and demand answers. I didn't regret taking Nathan to court. I didn't regret refusing his settlement offers. I'd enforced boundaries that should have existed all along. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at a coffee shop. She asked how I was doing, and I gave her the short version of what had happened. She listened with wide eyes, then said, "I can't believe you went through all that alone." I smiled. I wasn't alone. I had a good lawyer and a lot of patience. She shook her head in admiration. Most people would have just let it go to avoid the drama. I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe most people would have stayed quiet, accepted the loss, and moved on. But I wasn't most people. I'd spent too many years being the quiet, responsible one. This time, I chose to fight back, not with anger or revenge, but with the law and the truth. Looking back now, I see the entire experience differently. Yes, Nathan stole my money. Yes, he betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. But in a strange sense, he also gave me something unexpected: clarity. I learned that loyalty to family doesn't mean accepting abuse. I learned that staying silent doesn't keep the peace. It just protects the guilty. I learned that I was stronger than I ever realized. The grocery store moment, the one where my card declined and my world collapsed, felt like the end of everything. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of me taking control. I didn't break any laws. I didn't seek revenge. I simply enforced boundaries and demanded accountability. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. Nathan will carry the consequences of his actions for years. I hope he learns from them. I hope he becomes a better person. But even if he doesn't, I know I did the right thing. I protected myself when no one else would. I stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. And I proved that trust isn't weakness. Betraying trust is. I still live in my small townhouse. I still save carefully. I still keep my circle small. But now I do it with my eyes wide open. Nathan took my money, but I took back my power. And that's worth more than any dollar amount. These days, I don't think about Nathan much. Occasionally, I'll hear updates through family members. He's working steadily, paying off his debts, keeping his head down. I don't wish him harm, but I don't wish him well either. He's simply a chapter of my life that's closed. I've started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other people who've been taken advantage of by people they trusted. It's surprising how common these stories are. Family members, romantic partners, close friends who exploit trust for financial gain. Many victims stay silent out of shame or fear. I tell them what Ms. Sharma told me: "You didn't lose yet." I share my story not as a victory lap, but as proof that fighting back is possible. That the system, while slow, can work if you're patient and thorough. That staying quiet doesn't protect anyone except the person who hurt you. Some people thank me. Others just nod, taking it all in. I understand both reactions. It took me a long time to find the courage to act, and even longer to feel like myself again. But I did it. And so can they. My brother drained my accounts and ran. 2 days later, he called screaming, panicked, desperate. And in that moment, I realized something important. He'd already lost. He just didn't know it yet. There's a small garden behind my townhouse that I'd neglected for years. Last spring, I finally cleaned it up, pulled the weeds, planted new flowers, added a bench where I could sit and think. It became a quiet place where I could process everything that had happened. One evening, I was sitting on that bench when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Nathan. Just 2 words: "Thank you." I stared at the screen, confused. Thank you for what? For taking him to court? For holding him accountable? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Whatever he meant by those words was his journey to figure out, not mine. I set the phone down and looked at the flowers I'd planted. They were blooming now, bright and healthy. It felt like a metaphor I didn't want to overthink but couldn't ignore. Growth takes time. Healing takes effort. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't the loss itself. It's learning to trust yourself again. I've learned to trust my instincts. I've learned to ask questions. I've learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And I've learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, honesty, and genuine care. Nathan taught me all of that, though not in the way he intended. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up here, stable, strong, at peace. I wouldn't have believed them. The grocery store parking lot moment felt like rock bottom. But it wasn't the end. It was a turning point. I didn't just survive what Nathan did to me. I rebuilt myself into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I won on my terms, not through revenge, but through patience and persistence. I followed the law, trusted the process, and refused to let anyone silence me. That's the part I'm most proud of. Not the money I recovered, but the boundaries I enforced. The message I sent to Nathan, to my family, and to myself. I matter. My well-being matters. And no one gets to take that from me without consequences. These days, when people ask me how I'm doing, I answer honestly, I'm good. Really good. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. I've learned to protect what's mine, not with walls, but with wisdom. And when I think about everything that happened, I don't feel bitter anymore. I feel grateful. Grateful for the strength I didn't know I had. Grateful for the lesson, painful as it was. Nathan stole my money, but I took back my power. And that's the ending he never saw coming. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up here, stable, strong, at peace, I wouldn't have believed them. The grocery store parking lot moment felt like rock bottom. But it wasn't the end. It was a turning point. I didn't just survive what Nathan did to me. I rebuilt myself into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I won on my terms, not through revenge, but through patience and persistence. I followed the law, trusted the process, and refused to let anyone silence me. That's the part I'm most proud of. Not the money I recovered, but the boundaries I enforced. The message I sent to Nathan, to my family, and to myself. I matter. My well-being matters. And no one gets to take that from me without consequences. These days, when people ask me how I'm doing, I answer honestly, I'm good. Really good. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. I've learned to protect what's mine, not with walls, but with wisdom. And when I think about everything that happened, I don't feel bitter anymore. I feel grateful. Grateful for the strength I didn't know I had. Grateful for the lesson, painful as it was. Nathan stole my money, but I took back my power. And that's the ending he never saw coming.